Thank you everyone so much for joining this webinar entitled Solar Ecosystems, Restoring Nature Alongside Solar Power. My name is Innis. I work for the Renewables Grid Initiative and I am Manager for Energy Ecosystems. That means I work on all of the topics that we handle with onshore environment. That includes power lines, but also wind and solar as well. This is now the 5th webinar that we are holding in our Energy and Nature series. And this Energy and Nature webinar series seeks to identify, contact, celebrate, and really spread good practices from across Europe and even often further beyond, which bring us closer to realizing the goals of the energy transition, but also minimizing risks for nature and even going a step beyond that to actually restoring and supporting biodiversity. We've done webinars in the past on protection of birds, around power lines, around wind turbines, vegetation management is a big topic as well. And today is actually the first time that we're diving into the world of solar. So we're very excited to get into it. And there will be another webinar held later in the year to further this topic as well. Just to be clear on a bit of housekeeping to start with, so we are recording this. This is so that we can put it online afterwards. We have many people interested in different parts of the world. And we would also ask everyone in the audience to please rename yourself with your full name and your organization name as well, just so that in the discussion afterwards, we know who we're talking to. It's fine if you want to keep your cameras off at the start, but for the Q&A afterwards, it would be really nice if you can turn your cameras on so that we can get a bit of a dynamic conversation going. And yeah, just in case you are not familiar with RGI, we are a not-for-profit organization based in Berlin, and we are an agglomeration of NGOs and TSOs, transmission system operators from across Europe. We have now 26 members from 11 countries in Europe, all the way down from Portugal up to Ireland and the UK and across and down to Croatia. And we're constantly growing. And together with these maybe unlikely partnership of actors, we seek to further the energy transition in a way which is transparent, fair, and brings along the public, and also works in harmony with nature, so that we can come towards and achieve the decarbonization goals of the Paris Agreement, tackle climate change, and the biodiversity crisis as well. So you might be asking yourself, if we are the Renewables Grid Initiative, why are we touching on this topic of solar? Well, I think we're not alone in the realization in recent years that we're facing multiple crises at the same time. The climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and also the energy crisis demand that we take a holistic approach, that we move beyond this kind of silo thinking where we've been trapped in recent years. And this is even more important for the topic at hand because all of these crises require a lot of space. No, I think it's clear that protecting nature cannot be limited to these protected areas that we have across Europe. You know, we need to maximize space for nature and biodiversity. Meanwhile, we also need to find space urgently to expand renewable energy sources so that we have enough renewable energy to phase out fossil fuels. And thirdly, on a more positive note, I think we've realized that solar and renewable sites have more to offer than just producing electricity. And here the key word is multifunctionality. And that's what we're really talking about here. We're talking about integrated nature protection, which can be coupled with energy generation and be done in really the best way possible. So that's what we want to bring you today. We want to describe and present with the experts that we've got on the panel here, approaches, guidelines, and real practices on the ground which reconcile energy and nature. And these experts are Carla Freund from NABU, who is the Policy Officer for Nature-Friendly Energy Transition in Europe. So we're very happy to have Carla here. She knows her stuff. We have Lina Dubina from SolarPower Europe. She's the project coordinator of sustainability, and she worked over the past years and months on this excellent report that's just come out, also together with Carla and with NABU and BirdLife, actually, that you see on the right-hand side here, solar biodiversity and land use. And then we also have Thies, Jensen and Marie Pukas from Wattmanufactur GmbH, which run solar parks across Europe, across Germany, sorry, which I actually had the pleasure of visiting last year. And it's really inspiring to see how they actually do combine all of these things of renewable energy generation, agriculture, but also top-notch nature protection. So enough from me. I will pass the word straight over to our first speaker, who is Carla, and I will stop sharing my screen so that she can share hers. And yeah, Carla, all the best.
Great, thank you. I'm just searching for my PowerPoint. Full screen. Going through the motions of webinars for the last 4 years. So can you see it in full screen and not presenter mode?
Yeah, that looks great.
All right, so yeah, thank you for having me here. As Liam said, I'm Carla. I work for NABU, and just briefly, for those of you who may not know NABU, it's a German NGO that is part of the BirdLife Network, so originally focused on bird protection, but NABU has expanded into lots of different areas of environmental issues, and we also focus on the energy transition. For NABU, I'm actually based in Brussels, so I work mostly on European topics and European energy policy, for example. So jumping right into what I'll be talking about today, I'll be talking briefly about the policy framework and targets that are especially relevant for solar and solar expansion. Kind of highlighting why this topic is so relevant today. I mean, aside from the energy transition, climate crisis that we all know, but there are some policy aspects that have changed recently that make it especially relevant. And then the bulk of my presentation will be how do we actually reconcile nature with solar farms? What are the risks and especially what are the opportunities? Liam already mentioned, we need to use every space that we have for both these crises. So it's going to be important to double up. And then a little bit about priorities moving forward. So jumping straight into the EU and German policy framework and targets, I'll start with the EU. So looking at overarching targets. Just recently, the emergency regulation or council regulation for accelerating the permit granting process, this focused on other aspects, not just solar, but it had a heavy view on solar. So especially some of the permit granting issues were, or the load was lightened a little bit and deadlines were decreased. So that's really important. That'll be in effect for 18 months. And then we'll see what happens from there. And then currently still in negotiation in the EU Parliament and the Council is the Renewable Energy Directive, the fourth version of it. There will be a higher renewable energy target, which is obviously relevant for solar. We don't know exactly yet which it'll be, if it'll be 40% or 45%. And then also looking at environmental considerations. So we have the biodiversity strategy, which aims at putting Europe's biodiversity on a path to recovery by 2030. And then we have the directives, the Habitats Directive and the Birds Directive. Obviously, the Habitats Directive aims to promote the maintenance of biodiversity, and about 26% of our land is currently protected, but I have to highlight that it's not just about protection, it also is about the management of the area and putting plans in place and money to be able to properly protect those lands. So even though 26% is just off the target of 30, there's still quite a way to go. And then the Birds Directive aims to protect all 500 wild bird species naturally occurring in the European Union. At least 32% of EU bird species are currently not in good conservation status. I have to mention that as working for a bird life organization. And then also new and currently still in negotiation is the restoration law. We know that protecting these areas will not be enough. We need to bring back nature in every part as strictly protected areas, but also in combination with other, for example, solar parks. And then in Germany, it's supposed to, so by 2050, at least 80% of electricity is supposed to come from renewable sources. This is the goal they set. And then the solar PV goal was also significantly increased, ensuring 250 gigawatt by 2030. Currently, it's around 60 gigawatts, so it would be addition of 155 gigawatt. And even if half is on rooftop and half is on open spaces, our estimate, and this is just a ballpark estimate, would be about 77,000 of additional hectares for solar parks. So this is quite a lot of space. To put that in perspective, in 2001, about 25,000 hectares were added as solar farms. And again, in perspective, that's actually only 0.1% of area that's currently used for agriculture. So we're also speaking of a lot of additional area, but there are also other land uses that are using a lot of areas that need to be considered. So moving forward to, yeah, we're facing two crises, both the climate and the biodiversity crisis. The climate crisis obviously impacts on people and species, and we've been already feeling those impacts for quite a while. Here on the side, you can see the drought map of Germany for September, September of 2022. The dark red areas are an exceptional drought. So you can see that was incredibly widespread across all of Germany. And our main, one of the main things we can do to combat the climate crisis is protection through the energy transition. But at the same time, that has also some impacts, for example, habitat encroachment. So yeah, what are the risks of the energy transition? It's destruction of habitats due to the construction, deterioration of habitats and species due to operation, barrier effects for mammals, and confusion of solar modules with freshwater areas for insects and birds because of the reflectivity. Of course, these are things that we can avoid through design and how we build our solar parks. So where should we build solar parks? I will only speak about siting and sort of where we should build very briefly and focus more about the design later. But I mean, in general, we should follow the mitigation hierarchy. So avoid all impacts, which is the siting and planning part, finding areas that will have less impact versus other areas, then minimize through mitigation measures. Restore and offset are the last two things that you need to do. So generally, we should avoid Natura 2000 sites. Those are areas of high biodiversity value and should be protected and development should be avoided. But there are also urbanized areas within Natura 2000 sites, like roofs and parking lots, that can just be used for solar development as well. And then, yeah, generally looking towards urbanized environments, rooftops, parking lots along highways, etc. And when you're building in these areas, there are also ways you can bring nature back through nature-based solutions, for example, green roofs, nesting boxes, etc. And then in greenfield, so in open areas, the location and design are important. Those two things will especially determine how much biodiversity you can bring back into an area. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on heavily in my presentation. So in greenfields, this also includes agricultural areas and natural habitats. So nature needs to be included in the whole process of building a solar farm. So in site selection, design, and the maintenance process. And it will benefit, or it can benefit, biodiversity if it's built in a low biodiversity value area. So for example, brownfields or old mining sites, or within very intensively used agricultural land. If you build a solar park there and you use the right design, you can really have a big positive impact on biodiversity in those areas. And then especially if you're using native vegetation, and as I already said, in intensive agricultural areas. This is again site specific. Everything is project and site specific, what I'm talking about. And then if you don't use fertilizer and pesticides, obviously, for example, in heavily used intensive agriculture area, you're sort of creating a safe haven where birds and insects have a place to go to get away from the agricultural use. And then an example would be for a pollinator-friendly solar farm if you plant native vegetation and make sure that it's not a heavily used area. So I was already mentioned design a few times, so I'm going to go through what NABU suggests should be incorporated in the design of a solar farm. So crossing opportunities for large mammals. This needs to be highlighted that you should generally not end the crossing opportunity in a road because that will do more harm than good. And this is especially important in large solar farms or consecutively planned solar farms. So if there's a few next to each other, it's really important that you offer space for these mammals to be able to move through uninhibited. And then the same thing also goes for small mammals and amphibians. So you need to leave enough space between the soil and the fencing. And or if you don't leave any space at the bottom, it needs to have enough a diameter in the fence mesh that you're using. So this is, I mean, very specific, but just to highlight that there are very specific things you can do. Then, yeah, the total sealed area should not exceed more than 1% of the total area, and sufficient infiltration and precipitation should be ensured in the area, so that you're not creating runoff and things like that. And then you definitely should use native hedges to create a biotope and site protection, and these especially can be valuable as perching areas for individual bird species. And also definitely don't use any barbed wire on the fencing that you're using, because that's obviously very detrimental to any animal that would come in contact with them. And then no more than 40% of the area should be covered. If you allow for shading and a lot of sun to access the area, then it's actually proven that you will increase species density, and especially for insects, reptiles, and birds. So this would be very important. And yeah, and depending on the location, you can add a pond or a wetland. I mean, especially if you have, for example, an old mining area and you do a wetlands restoration project, that can be a huge benefit for the area if the area allows for that. So again, it's site specific. And then post-construction and maintenance. So after completing the construction work, the area should be greened by using, for example, indigenous low-growing and site-appropriate wild plant species. This leads to an increase of biodiversity, and the native species also fulfill a wide range of ecosystem services. And then sometimes because of the construction and sort of moving heavy vehicles, etc., this can compact soil and limit plant growth. So after the construction, this would be considered and can be obviously minimized. And then when you're managing the site, you should use site-adapted diverse mowing or grazing management. This also depends on where you are. For example, 2 mowing cycles can be beneficial, or a few grazing passes through sheep, for example, can be useful. And what will determine this is the vegetation structure, nutrient balance, and breeding seasons of the ground nesting bird species that naturally occur in the area where you're building. And this also highlights the need for continuous monitoring to ensure adaptive management. If, for example, you notice that your management practices aren't well adapted to the species there, then that can be shown through monitoring practices. And this should be centralized and public. This should be done in a centralized and public way, so that we have more information on all these kinds of things. And then again, just to highlight, no fertilizer or pesticides. So what are the advantages of these kinds of things? You have obviously renewable energy source. You have a static plant that there's no moving parts generally, like for example in a wind farm, that needs to be highlighted, that is a big difference. You have a calming of the area. There's less traffic going around because you have fencing and sort of blocked off a little bit protected, you would say. And it's less intensively used. Again, no fertilizer or nutrient input. You have small scale differences. Like I said, shade and sun will create sort of a microclimate, and different types of vegetation and different types of snow cover. So that's actually really beneficial for biodiversity, to have different kind of small ecosystems in the area. And then obviously we talked a lot about PV using a lot of space, but comparatively to, for example, other plants that are used for energy use, so for example, rapeseed, wheat, or corn, we have a much higher energy yield per hectare used per year. So of course, this is beneficial compared to monocultures, for example. And then I will finish off with our general asks. So, I mean, we have to, as a nature conservation organization, highlight that we need a massive reduction of our energy and resource consumption. This will have to happen in general, but of course, our energy needs are always going up through digitalization, etc. So where we can, we need to reduce. Then we need a significant increase in energy efficiency, and everything else needs to be covered by renewable energy. Nature protection and energy transition are not enemies, contrary to some of the to popular belief. I think you don't need to deregulate environmental protection to complete the energy transition. And then you should have some kind of binding criteria by municipalities and environmental authorities on achieving an increase in biodiversity in solar farms. So some of the ideas that I put out today, these should be binding and should be standard. And then identify degraded sites that are opportunities for restoration in combination with, for example, the restoration law. So thank you for listening. And I think I understand that we'll have time for some clarifying questions before we move on to the next presentation. Should I stop sharing the slides or should I keep them up?
Yeah, please do.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Carla. That was a really great presentation and generally just a really great insight into actually all of the different things that are possible to use to really benefit biodiversity. I think it kind of makes it clear how simple it can be to really, really help biodiversity. One of the points you made at the end, I think, is really, really key. Just this message that the energy transition and that nature protection don't have to be enemies. No, that's really at the heart of, I think, how we need to think moving forward. So before we pass on to the next speaker, we do have a couple of minutes. If anyone has any comprehension questions, if anything Carla said wasn't quite clear. Yeah, I see Julia Ludemann. Would you like to unmute yourself, turn your camera on and ask your question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't turn my camera on.
No worries.
But I will ask my question. You said that with the right management, there's actually a species density increase. And I'm very interested in this fact. Can you tell us the source for this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can send the source around afterwards. I don't know it off the top of my head, the exact citation. But yeah, there's a scientific study that was done. And also management in certain solar parks done by NABU that measured some of the species increase. But that fact was specifically referencing the sort of having shading and light penetration can enhance the species density of insects, birds, and reptiles. So it was very specific on that fact.
Okay, but that is really cool that this is actually getting proved now.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your answer. Thank you for your question, Thies. Julia, sorry. I see Marina Torrejas. Would you like to unmute yourself and turn your camera on if you can?
I ask? Or
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah? Okay. Hi. Thank you very much for the presentation. I really like it. I just have particular question. I'm not really have any knowledge actually about solar power installation and infrastructures, but I was interested about the thing that you said in one of the advantages about calming the area through fencing. Is fencing like compulsory in solar power infrastructures or not, or it's an option to do that? And if it is so, even compulsory or not, how I understand that birds maybe have no much problems about fencing, but maybe other smaller mammals could have, and if you have any particular prescriptions about this type of fencing.
Yeah, so whether or not it's compulsory, maybe actually one of my colleagues in this call can better answer that question. Maybe Wattmanufactur or maybe SolarPower Europe. I'm not actually sure if it's compulsory. I imagine it's often fenced off because there are quite expensive modules that probably shouldn't be easily accessible by the general public. That would just be my imagination. In terms of fencing, yes, of course, if you there needs to be certain criteria fulfilled to be able for small mammals to be able to pass. I mean, this is like a minimum height off the ground where small mammals can go through, or for example, just having the diameter in the loops of the fencing for smaller reptiles or smaller mammals to pass through. So of course, if you just block it off, then you're creating a barrier effect, and that's obviously something negative. So yeah, I mean, it has to be done in the right way to have a positive effect.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Marina, for your question. Thanks again for the answer. So I see there's two more questions. Benedetta Strohmeyer and Rocco Carella. Just before I'll give the floor to you, are these comprehension questions or rather deep discussion questions? Because if they're deep discussion questions, let's maybe save them for the end.
Okay, this will be a deep content discussion, yes.
I promise you that I'll give you priority at the end, Benedetta.
Okay.
And Rocco, the same question to you.
Maybe can be at the end. It's about discussion, maybe.
Okay, fabulous. So we'll come back to you both at the end. That'll be after the third presentation. And in the meantime, we pass the word to Lina Dubina from SolarPower Europe. So over to you, Lina. Feel free to share your screen.
Yes, thank you, Liam. Just give me a second. And you should be able to see the screen, right?
Yeah, looks great. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Well, already as nicely introduced by Liam, my name is Lina, and I work as a policy advisor for sustainability at SolarPower Europe. Maybe for those who haven't heard of the SolarPower Europe, we are a trade association consisting of more than 280 members that cover the whole solar industry. So starting from manufacturers to operation maintenance, developers, researchers, etc. So it's a huge crowd of the members that we have at the SolarPower Europe. And today I'm quite excited also to talk a bit about one of the essential topics that we're working at the SolarPower Europe, which is the recent report or the guidelines that we developed in cooperation with the BirdLife, which is solar biodiversity land use best practice guidelines. So maybe just a little bit, so today the focus will be just to introduce a bit, what are the guidelines, what exactly is it about, what's the content? But maybe before I go into the detail of what the report consists, I thought I would just bring a bit of a state of play of the different issues that actually have already been covered by Carla. So I'm going to be quite fast. And I'm sure you already have seen a majority of these numbers, if not in Carla's previous presentation, then in a couple of media and scientific papers. So as we know, on a global scale and also in a European context, there's a big need to aim towards the climate neutrality, reach the energy decarbonization. So for that, of course, we're going to need to deploy renewable energies. And as for now, we're aiming at reaching 45 renewable target by 2030, and hopefully aiming at 100% renewable energy target by 2040. And this is, of course, based on our own studies where we use the high scenario of the deployment and aiming at quite substantial targets to reach in the next 2 decades. Now, that being said, in terms of the renewable energy targets, there's also a big role for the solar. And what we have seen in the past 2 years is that there's a big installation has happened, and it has actually doubled in the numbers if you compare 2021 and year of 2022. And that being taken into consideration, we also understand that we can actually reach the 1 terawatt solar target by 2030, if not even surpass it. And that leading us to reaching a target of 5 terawatt of solar to be installed by 2040. So that being said, that of course requires a lot of solar to be deployed and with an accelerated pace. But for that to happen, we also understand that rooftops, as already mentioned by Carla before, is not going to be enough. So we're going to need to deploy utility scale or large scale solars to be able to sort of reach the ambition that we've set for the Europe. Now, speaking in parallel, and again, as already mentioned by Carla, there are other issues that have happened and that are currently happening that are relating to biodiversity loss, land scarcity issues, land degradation, etc. Just to give you a couple of facts, currently it's around 85% of the global wetland areas that have been lost, and around 1 million of animal species that are endangered. Whereas if you look on the European scale, it's more than 80% of the continent's habitats that are currently under critical conditions. And that sort of intertwines well with the land scarcity or the land competition concern. As of in Europe, it's currently around 80% of the land that is used for settlement, agriculture, forestry, and infrastructure. Now, that being said, as a solar industry, we understand that there's going to be a need to roll out big amounts of solar in the coming years to even reach the first targets by 2025. But we also understand that it's going to have to happen with a conscious mind towards environment and keeping the nature conservation and restoration objectives. Now, that being said, just a quick facts on what exactly are the benefits of solar. So a little bit of a different numbers from what Carla presented before. So generally, solar takes up a small land area that is relative to the EU surface area. So from the SolarPower calculations that we've done, if currently we would supply the EU power generation with solar only, that would require approximately 0.26% of the land. And just to give you sort of a bit of a comparison, the agricultural land currently takes up around 38%. And I'm sure you also all know solar is rather versatile technology. You have seen different innovations happening. For instance, there's a possibility to do building integrated PV. There's possibility to use solar on already installed artificial surfaces such as rooftops. There's the dual land use potential of agrivoltaics, floating PV, etc. But aside of having only it as an innovative technology, it also brings a lot of positive environmental benefits. It can also aim towards minimizing the land competition concern and sort of on a more broader scope contribute to tackling the climate change. And there also have been already a lot of studies done in terms of what exactly is the effect for the biodiversity. And a lot of studies have already shown that there is a lot of the positive impacts on biodiversity, looking at increase in biological diversity on the sites, looking at how the soil health has been improved, contribution to carbon capture measurements, and potentially also looking at the different restoration possibilities. And this is, of course, done when we compare to different types of other land use management practices, such as agriculture. Now that all of what I've just sort of given or said, we understand as an industry, again, that solar will be needed to reach the goal of becoming a climate neutral continent, to be able to decarbonize the energy sector. But we also believe that will have to be done hand in hand going with the environmental and nature protection goals. And we see a huge possibility for the solar to actually bring the positive benefits when it comes to environment, nature, and land. So that being said, this sort of paves a little bit of a way. Why did we focus on developing the best practice guidelines, and why is the biodiversity and land use essential topic for the solar industry? And just to give you a quick view on exactly what did we focus in the report. So we divided into 3 main chapters. First of all, we focused on sort of providing an overview of what is the nature legislation at the EU level and how is it transposed into national levels, and then assessing a couple of member state examples on how exactly do these national regulations and initiatives, how do they correlate with the solar deployment. On the second chapter, we focused a little bit more on how to exactly assess different types of lands and what would be the potential impacts if we were to deploy solar on these lands, and then outlining a couple of key actions that need to be considered when we select or identify a land that can be suitable for solar. And last but not least, we also focused on providing best practice examples. So we looked at the real life examples, which you're going to hear a bit more in the next presentation, but we also focused on providing sort of best practice guidelines in terms of what environmental considerations need to be taken into account when we're looking at different project phases. So whether that's project design plan, whether that's the operation maintenance, or whether that's the decommissioning of the project. And today I decided that I'm going to tackle a little bit and give a bit of an overview on how did we work with the land use chapter, and then providing a bit of the understanding of the best practice guidelines in terms of the environmental integration. So what exactly we did for the land use or the selection of a suitable land for solar. So we used the EU Coring land classification scheme, and which is based on 5 different types of land, as you can see on the screen. So we distinguished artificial surfaces, water bodies, agriculture areas, wetlands, and forests. And we sort of took a deep dive into each of these areas and assessed what could be the potential impact? So whether that's a positive or a negative impact on a specific type of a land if solar is being deployed, what could be the potential challenges and what needs to be considered if we were to roll out a solar project on these type of lands. So maybe just to give you a bit of a more concrete example, if we take artificial land as one of the type of lands that we assessed in the chapter. So we would look at how is this type of land classified, what is the definition of artificial land, and then assessing what is the impact. So for instance, for artificial land, it naturally is a rather low biodiversity site. So there could be a potential of actually increasing biodiversity, but depending on certain specific sites, an assessment might need to be considered. So again, a bit more concretely, if we are looking at a sealed land, so for instance, port areas, car parks, areas that are located nearby road and rail networks, potentially great areas for deploying solar. However, should consider also what is the nearby ecological features of in the area. So what is the type of a land that's in the vicinity of these artificial or sealed lands. Then if we look, for instance, on degraded land, such as construction sites or wasteland, again, quite a great way to use solar, specifically if we want to restore the degraded land, but we should also assess exactly what technical aspects like grid availability, economic feasibility, etc., should be considered when we're looking at these type of lands. Or another more concrete example, if we're looking at sites like abandoned airports, old mining places, old quarries, etc. Again, appropriate site assessment should be done based on specific site, because we know that some of these areas might potentially be high in biological diversity, and hence a specific environmental consideration should already be assessed at the project design stage, so we can make sure that the local flora and fauna is not being distracted or is not being impacted, but in contrary, looking at where can we actually enhance and provide biodiversity net gains. So this is just a little example and a little bit about what exactly we focused when looking at selecting suitable land for solar. And based on that assessment, let me just move this. So based on that assessment, and when we also analyzed a bit of the different policy context on member state and national level, we came up of the key recommendations that we think are quite important on when we speak on the EU or national level. I'm not going to go through all of them, but my just to maybe highlight a few important ones on our end. So first and foremost, obviously integrating spatial planning, not only at the national and regional level, but looking also at the local level, so we can actually be able to identify the different types of a land and what exactly could be suitable for the renewable energy deployment. We also see that there's quite of a need to publish guidelines when we conduct different impact assessments. So particularly when we do strategic environmental assessment or environmental impact assessment for the project. So we can see there is a lack of best practice guidelines or guidelines in general when it comes to solar projects. And we also foresee the need to be able to access these best practices across the different member states. There's also a need to have a more appropriate training scheme when it comes to the specific authorities that facilitate or that conduct the EIA and SEAs, and sort of ensuring also that there's a sufficient level of understanding of what type of lands are there, what could be the potential impacts when citing different renewable energy projects. And last and not least, also quite important point to highlight is having the ability to have a good holistic stakeholder engagement. So when we do these EIA and SEA assessments, to make sure that we facilitate discussion amongst different experts, including NGOs, local communities, to sort of being able to facilitate not only the qualitative, but also transparency into the decision-making process. So this is just a brief touch upon what are the key recommendations. And I thought I'm going to use my last slide if I still have the time.
You do, go ahead.
I do, okay, perfect. So I'm not going to focus on the best practice examples in terms of how do solar project developers have integrated different environmental aspects, because I know that the next speaker is going to be talking about that a little bit more. But I thought I would highlight on the guidelines that we provided, or more so a checklist on what needs to be considered when we do different, when we go through different project phases. So for instance, it would be, obviously we would focus on things like soil health, water, air, noise pollution, etc., and sort of looking at these different components and seeing what needs to be sort of assessed, what needs to be considered when we look at the project stages. Just to give you a couple of examples, if you look at the project design, as already mentioned before, obviously quite important to integrate local experts like NGOs that understand the site specifics, understand what is the local flora and fauna, and then prepare together with them site-specific biodiversity management plans, so to know how exactly to provide biodiversity gains throughout the operation and maintenance of the solar park. Or we're looking at project construction phases, again, looking at different aspects on how to not disturb the land, the soil, and how to prevent different, for instance, spills in the soil, etc. So I'm not going to go through all of these aspects. This is just a quick sort of quick bullet points on what exactly we focused for the best practice guidelines or for the checklist, mainly for the developers on what to focus to be able to ensure environmentally sound projects throughout the different phases. So this is a little bit on my end. I hope it was rather clear, and I look forward to hearing any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lina, for that really, really great overview and that great insight into the report that you've drafted. I can only encourage everyone to check out the report, to dive a bit deeper, because it is very, very comprehensive. So yeah, thanks again, Lina. I think one thing that you mentioned really stuck with me. I think when it comes to planning as well, siting and location, right? One of the most important things before we even think about the measures that can be implemented on site is where the sites go. And for this, of course, there's so many things that need to be taken into consideration, including, which is often forgotten, on the technical side. You know, a connection to the grid is really vital. And of course, that's something that we work on as well, and kind of really underlines the need for collaboration in very early phases between developers, nature protection organizations, but also grid operators. So kind of a collaborative approach from the start is key here. Again, I'd like to open the floor to any comprehension questions for Lina before we move on. And as before, there will be discussion at the end. But are there any questions, just to be clear on any points that Lina made before we move on? Okay, looks like you're very clear, Lina. I invite everyone as well, of course, as people are presenting, you're very welcome to post your questions in the chat, because when we move to the discussion afterwards, I will go first to the colleagues who put their hands up earlier, and then I'll work through the questions in a logical manner. So if you do have questions, put them in the chat, and then we'll work through them afterwards. And now we pass on to our last couple of speakers, who are Thies Jensen and Marie Pukas from Wattmanufactur. You are very, very welcome to go ahead and share your screen. I believe that will be you, Marie. And I give you the word. Thanks again, and enjoy, everyone, this great presentation.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much, Liam. Yeah, hello from our side also, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present our practical insights yeah, in front of so many people all over Europe. Yeah, Liam said that already. My name is Thies Jensen, and together with my colleague Marie Pukas, we will show you our practical insights, because we are a solar park planner, builder, and I forgot already the name. So we are investing in the solar parks and keep them for 30 years for the whole energy production time. Yeah, so, and we want to show you how renewable energy production from the solar parks works in combination with agriculture and nature protection. So I hope it works kind of well and that we are understandable, because yeah, it's the first time for both of us to give a presentation in English. So to get a better impression of who we are, we would like to start with a quick introduction of our company. So our company is called Wattmanufactur, and we've been trying for now more than 10 years to build solar parks build solar parks and create good places for biodiversity and nature protection in all over Germany. Yeah, in the picture you see our headquarters. It's called Osterhof, which is located in northern Germany, just a few kilometers away from the North Sea and very close to the Danish border. And the Osterhof is an active farm in the 8th generation. So we're based already a long time on that area. So since the 1990s, the Osterhof is an ecological crop farm. And since a couple of years, we farm on the highest ecological Demeter standard. The Osterhof, the agriculture Osterhof, manages around about 600 hectares in northern Germany and Denmark. So just you can get a little bit of that. And so I think we can say that the careful handling of land and the management with the natural resources we have, this is in all of our company genes and in our personal genes. In 1978, we installed the first wind turbine in our county and started to push the renewable energies in Germany. At first with the wind, because our boss and the main investor of us planned and built one of the first, we call it citizen wind parks or wind farms in Germany. And with the vision of 100% renewable energies, in combination with creation of good places for flora and fauna, the Wattmanufactur was founded in 2010. And in the meanwhile, yeah, our little team grew up to around about 50 people. So now Marie takes.
Yeah, I will continue with our references. As you can see on the picture, we operate in Germany. We have currently 250 megawatt peaks in operation, and another 1,000 megawatt peak is currently in planning. So to our vision, apart from all the bad things which are currently happening in the world, we are generally dealing with 3 big conflicts: the climate crisis and the closely linked extinction of species, the food production and the clean energy production. All of them are competing for the same thing, which is land. And the land is we need to solve all these problems is mostly owned by farmers. We designed a solution to solve all these problems, and we will present it to you at the end of the presentation. So let's move now to the best practices. We prepared 2 different examples for you. Both our solar parks have a different focus and are located in northern Germany. We will start with Kleinreide, which is focused on nature protection and biodiversity. So as you can see, the solar plant is located in the middle of intensive used farmland. This is why we choose this picture. And from above, it looks like any other solar plant, as you can find it on Google Maps as an example. But we will show you next what developed on the ground after we built the park with right row spacing and started to do extensive agriculture on the land. Here are some examples. So what did we do? Some years ago, we founded a new company called Osterhof Ökologisches Flächenmanagement, which is obviously a German name. Translated to English, it would be called Osterhof Ecological Land Management. And all our knowledge of agriculture management and the handling with natural resources comes here together. So the aim of the company is to ecological upgrade the land we need to build on our solar plant farms. This is one of the documents we use to plan all the measures. So when we begin to plan a new solar plant, they coordinate an ecological planning at the same time. And in addition of an extensive agriculture management and the implementation of ecological measures, the land is upgraded in a way that biodiversity and species diversity are increasing. Here are some pictures of the specific ecological measures which we implemented in Kleinreide. In June 2021, we hired several different focused biologists to identify flora and fauna. They counted 168 individual plants, including rare fern and moss. 48 of them are even listed as a red list species in Germany. Moreover, we built different habits for many insects, birds, butterflies, and amphibians. The next solar plant we will show you is located in Lottorf, also northern Germany, and is focused on rewetting the land and resulting moist protection. Moist PV is currently a really hot topic in Germany. Former moist areas are supposed to be rewetted, and in combination of renewable energy production, it should get funded by the state. Building a solar power plant on moist land is a big challenge because obviously not every area is suitable for this. We assume that it is only ecological possible if we have a peat thickness up to a maximum of 2.5 meters. So this solar power plant is really unique, and it's also still a research project. It's the first of this kind in Germany. We examine the success of the implemented measures and the possible extensive agriculture management on wet grassland. So next, Thies will continue again.
Yeah, so the question is how we can legally ensure that renewable energy production works sustainably in combination with agriculture and nature protection. This is the question we deal with all day long. Why? Because the core areas in our lives, Marie said it in the beginning, energy production, agriculture and nature production are always in competition to each other. And what does that mean? That's the question I think a lot of people don't really know. Agriculture owns most of the usable land and currently needs this land for food and feed production. In the future, agriculture will also have to make some of its land available for the fulfillment of high sustainability goals. If we think about the Europe Green Deal, the biodiversity strategy, Carla talked already before, and in addition, energy production and nature production want to claim even more land from agriculture for their goals or to fulfill their goals. So, and this is the question, and Carla and Lina said that already. They always think, or the most of the people think, okay, energy production and nature production works together very well. But a lot of people forget the agriculture in this thing, in this in this thing. So we say, why don't we think these three things together? The possibility exists because all the framework conditions on a solar park are in one place. And that it works practical, yeah, we showed you in the last slides, and we try the last or more than the last 10 years. So, and you can, genau. So, and then we say, Marie talked already before, or told you, and showed you the things we try to plan the ecological standard, and installing these measures, or installing measures to increase the biodiversity and the nature protection is very simple. But the sustainable support is the big challenge to keep the biodiversity for the long time. And the sustainable support only works with the sustainable management. And who can best manage land? We think the farmers can. And only the farmers can, because they know their land. And we think that we need to think and imagine of farming in the 1920s until 1950s. In that time, the agriculture and the farming creates our cultural landscape. Unfortunately, today they destroy it again, but we think we need to think back to that time and farm the land we have in that way. So And we think in solar parks, it's pretty possible. And you see the pictures here. This is our vision of how agriculture in the solar power plant should look like, and look like everywhere in the best case. And just an information, all of our solar power plants are eco-agricultural certified by the EC organic regulation. We don't earn money with that, but we do it because it's our vision and we think it's the right way. And we would be placed if most of the future solar parks are conceived as agricultural managed land according to the political guidelines of the CAP. I don't know if everybody knows what's the common agricultural politicians or politics is. That are the agricultural rules in Europe, and that's I think the same in all the European countries. Yeah, over the past few months, we've been working on a written concept of how we would like to see the trio of activities spread across a broad area in the future. So our idea is to introduce a new area category eligible for EG, other for European energy regulation and the CAP funding. We call extensive agri-PV. I think everybody knows, or maybe a lot of people knows, that in the German rules, in the German law is now the agriculture or the agri-PV a big word, but the rules of the agri-PV in Germany, I think they are not workable and practicable. So we think we need a solution for all types of agriculture and in combination with photovoltaics. Just go ahead, Marty, please. Yeah. So and the concept is pretty easy and bases on 4 criteria. And the first one is like, we think there should be a liable extensive agricultural management in the future with fixed specifications in the framework of the CAP by an agricultural company. So we think the farmers have to work or have to manage in the future the solar power park fields. So because then the biodiversity will keep growing. The next one is we think we have to advance the biodiversity and protection of habitats and flora and fauna, like that we have to count them, to monitor them every year, and to give the list to office, which is control everything. Yeah, that's I said that already. The thing is, if we look to the energy projection, the Bundesnetzagentur we call in Germany, they control all the rules we have to take, and we think if we think this whole thing in the agricultural way, everything is already there, because the agricultural sector is controlled all over. Oh, thank you. German Federation Network Agency. Good. And of course we need some standards in the way of building for the solar parks. That's the big thing. Like the NABU said that already, gave some criteria how to build a solar park, and we say we agree, of course, with some standards, not the standards of the NABU, but kind of same way. Yeah, and why is this the solution for renewable energy production, agriculture, and nature production? Because the most important thing is that we get market-based cheap energy production. I think Lina showed a picture with the kilowatt hours a year with in combination with crops and electricity. So on a hectare, we can earn a lot more money with electricity than with crops, and we need a lot more electricity in the future. So and the next thing is that the economic incentives for agricultural companies is very important. If we think the whole thing in an agricultural way, we can get another improvement of the income situation for the farmers, and whole thing, or also involving the tenants by taking over the extensive management, because most of the time they lose a lot of land, and they are very angry with that the PV is going to keep to take the agricultural land and something more. Yeah. And the last thing is, or one more thing is, and I think that fits pretty well together with the SolarPower Europe and the NABU, is that we fulfill a lot of sustainable goals with this kind of way we think agriculture and PV in the same way, because the agriculture industry has a lot of sustainable goals, very high sustainable goals with they have to fulfill in the next years. So, and then the next thing is the state receives land that can promote biodiversity at very low cost. So they don't need to put some more nature reserves or to pay farmers to get the land for nature reserves and stuff like that. So, and of course, we don't want to take even more land, because we have to take more compensation areas, because if we build the solar power plants, we do like this way. We put the compensation already in the field, and we do something more for the ecosystem than we destroy. Yeah, and of course, the cooperation of renewable energy production, agriculture, and nature production leads to a higher acceptance within the general public. That is what we use, or what we see all day in the practical. Yeah, that we can go over, I think, and that are the real goals and our vision to keep all the places in one field. And I want to say another thing to Carla Freund. She talked already about the diversity strategy and the goals. And that's the thing we disagree with the nature NGOs, because they want to get a lot of nature protected areas. And we do not want to see nature protected areas created by solar farms. We want to install high nature value farmland in combination with solar. And if we do, that's our meaning. If we do not think the energy transition and the climate crisis together with agriculture, we won't succeed, because the agriculture has the land everybody needs. And also, I would like to say something more to the land use. Lina talked a little bit before, but I think it was the land use of Europe. We always talk about the land use in Germany. And experts can already predict how much electricity we will need in 2030 or 2050. I think we need in 2050 around about 1,200 terawatts hour per year. And if we say 50% is produced by wind and 50% by solar, and of that solar or photovoltaics percent, we take 50% by solar power plants. That's what the German government says last year. So that means we have to produce 300 terawatt hours per year with solar power plants. And with today's technical standard and our way of construction, we will need around about 250,000 hectares of land, of farmland in Germany. I think 250,000 hectares means a pretty lot, is a very high scale, but approximately that is only 1.5% of the German farmland. Not more. And I think if we think all these problems and conflicts together, we will find a pretty good way to get the energy transition and the nature protection in one way. Yeah. And then I have a last request, because here are a lot of grid operators. Please expand the regional transmission grids as quickly as possible, because this bottleneck will probably become one of the highest obstacles in the energy transition. Yeah, and then now I think it's over, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Thies and Marie, for that excellent presentation. really, to see what you guys have done up in the north of Germany, but also elsewhere, and also to hear about your vision and really this important point about not forgetting agriculture. You're of course totally right. There's more dimensions to this than just energy and nature. There's land use, for which agriculture is a key and arguably the principal player. So yeah, thank you for bringing that to everyone's attention. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions on this because it's a topic that we've not really touched on before. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into the discussion. If I can ask everyone to turn their cameras on, if I can ask Marie to stop sharing your screen, then let's dive in. We have around 25 minutes left for questions. And I do have some people identified already from earlier, but I would also like to give Carla the opportunity to respond, first of all, to the comments. So Carla, over to you, and then I'll open the floor to the audience.
Yeah, I'll just make it very brief because we want to have discussion with the audience. No, I don't think we really disagree on this. I think agrivoltaics is important. I mean, you have to talk about how we do it, and you, I think, highlighted some of the things already. And I also want to clarify that we don't want massive nature protected areas together with solar. We want to have protected areas, and then we want to bring biodiversity into areas that are occupied by solar, and that can be a double value for both the climate and biodiversity crisis. So I'm not sure if we really disagree, but yeah, we can definitely have more exchanges on that.
Thank you very much for that, Carla. Okay, so I have a list of people to go through first, and Benedetta, you're at the top of that list. Thank you for your patience. Please go ahead.
Yes, I have just one question for Carla Freund, because you mentioned that you recommend that just 40% of the whole solar park area is covered with solar modules. And what is your advice? Is it better for giving an impact for raising biological diversity to have more space between the modules, or to have more space at the edge of the modules, at the edge of the solar park? What is your advice for this topic?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think with the 40%, the specific terminology is 40% covered by the area of the module, so that you're not shading more than sort of 40% of the area. So that's, I think, a little bit different than 40% of the total area of the solar park being covered by solar. Maybe I'm wrong. In terms of your question, what's more important, space between or space on the side? I mean, I think both is important. As we talked, there needs to be a way for mammals to pass through in between the modules as well, and there needs to be space for vegetation to grow in these sort of microclimates. And on the side, the perching habitats, the different types of trees that aren't shading too much the solar modules themselves. So I don't know if I can give you an exact answer of what's more important. I think there needs to be a balance, and I don't think I can quantify it with, 40, 60 or something like that. So maybe it's a very unsatisfactory answer, but it also depends on, I think, the species that live in that specific area. Like, are there lots of ground nesting species? Are there more nesting species that nest in trees or hedges or things like that? I think that's also a consideration that needs to be.
Yes, that's a thing I think as well, because if the target species are more birds, I'm quite sure that it's much more important that you have more space at the edge of the solar park, because there are several species who are not accepting there is more space between the rows. If it is 3, 4, 5 meters, it doesn't depend on, I think. So we prefer, I'm from the left Austria, we prefer that there's more space at the edge. Yes, and at 40% would be perfect, but I think in reality, the reality looks like 50% or 60%.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'm also from Austria, so maybe we can talk a little bit about that. I mean, I think, like I said, it's all project dependent, how exactly you execute it, and I think that's a very valuable input. Thank you.
Thank you both. Before we move on from this topic of spacing, Thies, would you like to add anything on spacing?
Yeah, I would like to add anything. Thank you. And there was one thing I wrote down when Carla was telling us this with the 40%. Like in the practice, I think there are a lot of companies who build or who cover 80% or something of the area with solar. How do you say? Panels? Yeah, right. With solar panels. And we think, or we build, we're building with around about 60% of covering. So, and there are some studies available in Germany. Also, maybe I can say it in German. Die Studie vom BNE Solarparks Gewinne für die Biodiversität. Or there was already I think in the February news in the article or von der Zeitschrift Naturschutz und Landschaftsplanung. Photovoltaik. Ja, die muss ich einmal gucken. Liam, kannst du die Studie noch einmal reinstellen? Yeah, right. There was already another thing which with a calculation our boss made where we can measure and the rows and the covering. And because our biologists we work together with and very close, they are monitoring all our parks. They found out that 2.5 meters of an area which where the sun gets down, then the biodiversity, I would say, explodes. So that means we need rows, the distance between the rows from around about 350 to 4 meters. And then we have around about 60% covered. That's the way we build.
Thank you very much, Thies. That was really insightful. I've shared these studies in the chat just now. And one thing that I would just like to add as well, one thing that really struck me when I was visiting the Wattmanufactur solar parks in the summer is that the ecosystems that establish beneath and between the panels are very different. I mean, the vegetation that grew directly underneath the panels was more shaded, it was more ferns, and I was really struck by the diversity in habitats actually, also underneath the panels. So I think it's important. Yeah, of course, this shading is a key point and the percentage is accurate, but it's not as if the land underneath the panels is wasted. Indeed, there'd be different habitats that would thrive underneath in the more shaded areas. I think we could go all day, but I do have a list, so I'll get back to it. So Rocco, you are next on my list. If you'd like to ask your question from earlier, you can.
Yes, okay. I have three different questions and consideration. The first about the presentation. First of all, thank you for the very nice and interesting presentation. About Carla, presentation of Carla, I want to underline that about the point required to preserve biodiversity in nature conservation in greenfield, about solar farm in greenfield. I think that we need also more, that it's always, for my experience, I work a lot on, as technician on environmental assessment. And we can have a lot of, in particular, about my experience in my country, in Italy. We can have a lot of fields where, of sites where there is not a value for biodiversity, because maybe we have just cultural areas. But this habitat can be very interesting for, in particular, during migration, for species are used from species of Annex 1 of Habitat Directive. And so it's not enough. We need always a very strong environmental assessment, because we can have the other impacts, indirect impacts, in particular loss of habitat, that can be less evident, but at the same time can do a lot of, can be very significant. Then I want to say on Lina Lina Dubina presentation that always related to environmental impact assessment. I agree that we need standardized methods, but I want to underline that impacts on fauna are, as we all know, site-specific and species-specific. So this means that it complicates everything. So we can have ideas with standardized methods, and this can help us. But we never should forget this, that the impact are of this kind, and so we can have unexpected difference sometimes in the field. And the last thing about the biodiversity practice, in particular on the first case that Maria Pukas has shown, that it's wonderful. But I want to ask, in particular, where has been done ponds and all this aspect. Is well known that one of the evidence of impact on birds is the lake effect. And the lake effect of solar farm, it's in particular for water birds. So I want to ask if in this wonderful plot that you have done, is also if there is a monitoring, because according to scientific paper, maybe also if the purpose is it's good, but I think it's important also to monitor if there is maybe some water birds that can be attract to this habitat that you have done, and maybe so you can also enhance an impact. Sorry, I was too long, sorry.
No, thank you, Rocco. Marie, go ahead and answer if you can.
Yes, of course we do monitoring every year, also not with our biologists, but also with our local nature protection associations. They also are there every year to see what increases and monitor all kind of flora and fauna. In the first practical insight, which was Kleinreide, we do have birds, of course, but basically on our second park, which is the Morse PV park, Lottorf, there are way more birds. There are also specific areas where birds can build their nest on the ground, and they are extra protected for wildlife. So we do monitor all the parks and all the animals, but we definitely have more birds in the second park.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie. There's many more questions. The one that was in the chat first, before I move over to you, Francisco, Mikel Fernandez asked, have you assessed the impact of biodiversity of existing agrivoltaic plants? And that was a question to Lina.
Yeah, thanks, Liam, and thanks for the question. Yeah, and particularly, so from the SolarPower Europe side, we focused on agrivoltaics, but since that was a rather new niche, we focused mostly on looking at the different technologies and how can that sort of, mostly focusing on what is the yield sort of potential, can you increase the yield when you do agrivoltaics, looking at certain environmental elements in terms of whether you can reduce water consumption, etc. But with that being said, we haven't focused specifically on assessing the impact on biodiversity. I know that there are a couple of new pilot projects that are assessing, that are integrating the different biodiversity aspects, for instance, integrating the green corridors, providing different type of habitats for the different plant and animal species. So this is still a rollout, and this is definitely going to be something that we're going to be focusing on our next report that we plan on publishing this year. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, I don't have a concrete answer to in terms of the biodiversity impacts. So this is something in our radar and that we are working on currently.
Yeah, thank you, Lina. I think also Thies has mentioned a few studies which are currently available in Germany only, German only, and there's some really, really interesting stuff in there. So I wonder if these studies that we mentioned and that I posted in the chat are also going to be translated into English. Because I think, yeah, there's a lot of research being done, a lot of pilot projects on the way, and I anticipate that this year, next year, there will be a lot more concrete biological indicators available on this. Yeah,
Exactly, because there's a lot of scientific reports already done, but as I said, a lot of them are focusing on the crop yield, on how to sort of increase the crop yields if you're combining the dual land use, and looking at some environmental components, but I haven't seen necessarily on biodiversity in itself yet.
Yeah.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you. Lina, I think it's also way more important to research the biodiversity things in that, because we say the dual use of the land with agriculture and PV, it won't work in the practical, because do intensive agriculture, or I can say only for Germany, I don't know in the warm lands or something, warm countries or so, maybe there, but the biodiversity is the way bigger problem in our country and than the intensive agriculture. So we think the agri-PV, the legal rules which are now making the standard, are not practical, and no big farmer will do or will farm intensive under agri photovoltaic.
Thank you very much for that, Thies. I have just been sent by Marie, thank you very much, the English translation of this BNE study, so I will send that in the chat as well so everyone can access it. I wonder the same question about this article that you shared, Thies, with the examples from your farms. That would be really nice to see in English. If you need a translator, hit me up. So I would pass the word now to Francisca, who's been very patient with your question. Please go ahead and ask. We can't hear you, Francisco. I wonder if your audio is connected.
I hope now it works.
It works.
My name is Francisco, and I come from a research center on biodiversity linked with the University of Porto in Portugal. And in fact, my comment is exactly related to the last two comments by Lina and Thies. And why is it not possible to practice intensive agriculture in the areas of these solar panels? I think if it is just a technical problem, maybe it's something for technology to solve, because if we were able to do that, you could save space for extensive agriculture, for biodiversity conservation, by focusing on areas that are already quite intensive in terms of agriculture. So is it a technical limitation? Which kind of relates to maybe it's an oversimplistic doubt or comment. Is it possible to make these solar panels higher below ground level, so that if in case that's a limitation for intensive agriculture, it could be solved like that, even if there are then some limitations with the type of crops because of shadowing? So is it a technical challenge? Because it could be a really neat solution to put these solar panels above very intensive farmland. Thanks. Very interesting presentations.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's not a technical thing, it's a practical thing, I think, and a subsidized thing. The biggest challenge we have is to produce very cheap energy. And if very cheap energy. And if we put the solar panels way higher, the energy price goes high as pretty much. So the energy production is getting higher and higher, or more expensive. And on that little bit of land we need to get the energy transmission is like 1.5% in Germany. So And we think working with in the common conventional agriculture in Germany is like if we put the fertilizer out or something like that, we work with working width of around about 30 meters or something like that. And every farmer is getting angry with if there's one stand or one thing in the field he has to drive around. So, and if we imagine a farmer has to work between solar panels and solar stands or posts, which with a wide of 10 meters or something like that, and he has to do it for 20 years. I think most of the conventional farmers will say, we don't want to, if we have to get some economical agriculture under that. So the only way we think will work is to extensive these fields, do something for the biodiversity, and keep the intensive agriculture on the other fields. I hope that was a little bit clear.
Clear, thanks. And it seems to me like it's a technical issue.
Yeah, but we also think if we do it, or we can imagine to do intensive agriculture and photovoltaics for some cultures like apples or berries or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Where the shadow helps or something for the rain or stuff like that, but not growing grain, corn, stuff like that.
Yeah, this is a really good point, and I think I'd just like to mention here, agri-PV is a very young thing that's going on. There's a lot of pilot projects on across Europe right now, and indeed some of them are giving really, really interesting results when it comes to actually the benefits that the infrastructure itself can lend to the crop growth. So talking about protecting certain crops from intense sun, also from the adverse effects of climate change in terms of, I don't know, hail or snow or intense rain, that there are benefits that can be gained for crops through the protection of solar panels. And indeed, we will hold another webinar in a few months' time where we try to explain a bit the technology behind solar PV, agri-PV, sorry. And I think as well, Thies, you really touched on an important point about the subsidies issue. The policy behind here, the policy framework needs to be fixed in order to enable this at a higher scale. I'll give the word to you in a second, Lina. I would just like to draw the attention to a comment in the chat that Benedetta said that the BNA study is financed by Solar Association and is best practice examples, not a scientific study itself. So I think we all wait eagerly for some more scientific studies to come out on this, which we'll of course share through our networks when they do. Thank you for the note there, Benedetta. Lina, you lowered your hand. Is there anything you'd like to add? Otherwise, I would pass on the word.
Yeah, just quickly wanted to add on what you already and Thies have mentioned in terms of the use up of agrivoltaics, the installations on the sort of arable or intentionally used land. Definitely is possible. There is technology for that. There's a lot of innovation have been happening from the developers in France. We can already see a lot of sort of pilot phases, specifically for vineyards where you use the big machineries that drive and sort of work with the crops, but then in the sidelands you have the technology for agrivoltaics as well. So that's definitely feasible, but already mentioned by Thies, it's more economically expensive because those obviously require more components, require more sort of installations. So it can be a bit of a hazard when it comes to economic feasibility to deploy these sort of installations. But it's already happening. There are a lot of pilot phases being installed across Europe, specifically in France and Spain, my knowledge.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Patrick has also just shared the work of the Fraunhofer ISE in Germany that indeed are doing a lot of interesting research on this. These are one of the people that I'm thinking about inviting to the next webinar so that they can share their scientific input. I have an eye on the clock, and unfortunately the time is 12:30, so we really do need to close. I have a ton more questions that I would like to ask, but I think what we're going to have to do is close here. And just always know that you're very, very welcome to share your questions via email. I will then pass them on to the respective person. And anyway, I think it's important to underline what we're trying to do here is to build a community of people across Europe and even further beyond that are interested in these kind of practices. This is a webinar series. This is integral to the work that we do at RGI. And so we want to connect you with each other. so that these conversations can keep on happening. Who knows, maybe new initiatives can be started up. So don't be surprised if you see an email from me. Also, I will be sharing things on social media. So please do follow Renewables Grid Initiative on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Sign up for our newsletter for future events. But yes, I promise to be in touch and to keep connecting, because I think these conversations are just vital to set the sparks going for new initiatives on the way. Sadly, the time is up, but thank you so much to our speakers. It's been excellent. You were brilliant. And thank you to everyone in the audience for listening and for your great questions too. I wish you all a very nice rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Ciao.